While I was on a business trip, my parents sold my dream sports car to pay for my sister's luxury vacation in London. The moment I walked through the door, my mom smirked and said, "Thanks to your car, our daughter is finally enjoying herself." I just laughed, quiet, sharp, the kind you let out when something inside you snaps. She slammed her hand on the counter and demanded, "Why are you laughing?" And that's when I told her the truth. The truth that made her face drain of every last drop of color, because the car they sold wasn't mine to sell. And in that moment, everything about my family, every lie, every betrayal, every wound I had swallowed for years, finally came to the surface like a punch to the chest. My name is Calum Price, and this is the day my own family crossed a line I could never come back from. But before I share my story with you, I want to know you're here with me. Just say listening in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. I love hearing how far my story reach. Sometimes even the smallest connection can make a story feel heard. Thank you. And now, here's my story. If this kind of real, raw storytelling speaks to you, don't forget to subscribe. It means more than you know, and it helps voices like mine not disappear in the noise. My name is Calum Price. I'm 30 years old now, but every time I think back to where it all began, I see the same image, a small wooden house tucked under the shadow of the Rockies in Flagstone Ridge, filled with the echo of my sister Leanna's laughter and the quiet space where my voice rarely mattered. I grew up knowing my family didn't function like other families. It ran on its own strange orbit, one where everything revolved around Leanna's wants, moods, and whims, while I drifted somewhere in the background like a planet too far from the sun to be noticed. Even when we were kids, the imbalance was clear. Leanna's birthdays were celebrated at Estes Park with balloons, catered food, and photo shoots by the lake. Mine were a quick dinner at home before Mom rushed off to help Leanna pick outfits for her dance class. Whenever our parents asked what we wanted, they always asked Leanna first. By the time they remembered I was in the room, the decisions were already made. I remember saving for months to buy a small starter set of automotive tools because becoming an engineer was the only dream I truly had. The day I finally brought it up, Mom barely looked at me before saying, "Let's use that money for Leanna's prom dress. She needs it more than you need tools." That sentence stayed with me longer than anything else, so I learned early to keep my head down. I became the quiet kid who did everything on his own, who budgeted every dollar, who took responsibility for himself because no one else would. While Leanna thrived on attention, flashing her smile, performing for strangers, dancing in living rooms, and demanding an audience, our parents insisted she had natural gifts, showering her with praise, as if she were destined for greatness. I stayed silent most of the time, but even silence can hurt when it's the only thing people leave for you. The contrast between us grew sharper with every passing year. Leanna was the sun. I was the shadow. Still, part of me hoped that if I worked hard enough, if I accomplished enough, my parents might eventually see me. But the first time I earned top marks, Mom simply said, "Of course you did. You've never had real struggles. Leanna has it harder." I stood there holding the certificate, realizing that no matter what I achieved, they would never treat us equally. That was the moment the earliest seed of conflict rooted itself inside me. And by the time I reached the end of high school, I already knew one truth: whatever life I wanted, whatever respect or recognition I longed for, I would have to build it myself, far away from anything that resembled home. High school only deepened the divide. While Leanna floated through classes on charm alone, I poured myself into science engineering clubs and any program that pushed my mind into places my home life never could. After school, I worked part-time at the town's auto garage, changing oil, rotating tires, and saving every spare dollar like it was oxygen. It wasn't glamorous, but it fueled the only dream that ever belonged solely to me. The real turning point came when I received a full scholarship offer from Colorado State University in Fort Collins. It was the kind of news any parent would celebrate. I remember rushing home, the acceptance letter crumpled from how tightly I held it, my heartbeat racing with pride. I stepped into the living room ready to finally be seen. Instead, Mom skimmed the letter, said, "That's nice, honey," and immediately turned back to comforting Leanna, who had just failed another cheerleading audition. Dad nodded at me with the same detached look he used whenever the conversation wasn't about Leanna. By the next minute, they were discussing whether they should take her to Aspen for a weekend reset so she could recover emotionally. My scholarship, the reward I'd fought years to earn, vanished from the room as if it had never existed. Liana's failures always required family attention. My successes required none. I kept telling myself it didn't matter that I didn't need applause, but inside something quiet and familiar ached. Liana kept spiraling academically, yet our parents insisted she had artistic potential, talking about her as if she were one lucky breakaway from stardom. Meanwhile, every sentence about me ended with, "But he'll be fine." I wanted to help Liana to be a real brother, but the way they propped her up while dismissing everything I accomplished made me step back from her, not because I didn't care, but because I was tired of being invisible. And then came the moment that changed everything I thought I understood about my family. One afternoon, as I walked past the kitchen, I heard Mom talking to our neighbor. Her voice was soft but certain as she said, "Calum is strong. He doesn't need affection. He's always been fine on his own. Liana needs all our love." I froze behind the doorway, feeling something inside me split. It wasn't accidental neglect. It wasn't misunderstanding. It was deliberate. Chosen. I don't think I moved for a full minute. I just stood there, absorbing the realization that the emotional distance I'd grown up with wasn't a fluke of circumstance, it was the structure of our family. The next week, when it was time for me to move into the dorms, my parents didn't come. They were taking Liana to a photo shoot she insisted would help her build a portfolio. So I packed my old car, drove to Fort Collins alone, carried my boxes up 4 flights of stairs, and pinned my first college poster to the wall in silence. Standing in that small dorm room, I felt 2 things at once: freedom and a hollow loneliness I couldn't shake. But I told myself I would push forward anyway, unaware that the imbalance I'd grown up with was only the beginning of a much bigger collision waiting for me in the years ahead. If ban muon toi viet tiep chuang 3 va chuang 40 chi kan noi. Graduating with honors should have felt like a new beginning, and in many ways it did. I landed a solid position at a tech company in Denver, a place buzzing with ambition deadlines and people who seemed to run on caffeine and competition. For the first time, I was somewhere no one knew me as the older brother of Liana Price. I was just Calum, the guy who solved system failures at 3 in the morning and got praised for it the next day. I worked harder than I ever had, partly because I loved what I did, and partly because I still carried that familiar ache, wanting to prove myself to people who would never see me. 2 years later, I bought a small condo in Boulder. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine, the first thing in my life I had earned without being overshadowed or pushed aside. I spent weeks fixing it up after work, painting the walls, assembling furniture, and building a small workspace where I could sketch engine layouts and dream about restoring a classic car someday. When everything felt ready, I invited my colleagues and, despite my hesitation, my family. I told myself maybe things had changed. Maybe they'd be proud. The night of the housewarming, I cooked everything myself. Simple dishes, but done with care, folding napkins, arranging chairs, making sure it all looked put together. My colleagues arrived first, warm and supportive. They complimented the place, the food, the effort. For a moment, I felt something close to belonging. Then my family showed up. The energy shifted immediately. Mom walked in, took one sweeping glance around the living room and said, "Oh, it's cute." Dad nodded like he was inspecting storage units. Liana walked straight to the mirror to fix her hair. Every time someone complimented me, my job, my home, my hard work, Mom would cut in with something about Liana's latest portfolio shoot or her increasing follower count online. At one point, my coworker Laura smiled at me and said, "This place is really you, Calum. You should be proud." Before I could even say thank you, Mom chimed in. "Did Calum tell you Liana just booked a modeling tryout? She's really the star of our family." Everyone fell silent for a beat, and I felt myself shrink inside my own home. It was as if my achievements were acceptable only as a backdrop to Liana's imagined future. After the guests left, David, one of the only co-workers who'd stayed behind to help me clean up, leaned against the counter and said quietly, "Calum, I don't want to overstep, but they don't respect you. Families don't treat someone they love like that." His words landed harder than I expected. They made something shift inside me. I'd always convinced myself I misunderstood things growing up, that maybe I was too sensitive or too quiet. Hearing someone outside the family see the same thing forced me to admit that maybe I'd been wrong about them all along. That night, after everyone left and the condo finally fell silent, I sat in my small garage staring at a rough sketch I'd made years ago of a Corvette Z06. It was the first time in a long while that something felt entirely mine. I placed the sketch on my toolbox, the lines worn but still beautiful, and promised myself I'd make it real. I didn't know then that this dream, the one piece of joy I allowed myself, would one day be the very thing that tore my family apart. Work stabilized, promotions slowly came, and for the first time in my life, people actually asked for my opinion instead of talking over me. I felt myself growing into someone I'd always hoped I could be. But while my career took shape, Leanna drifted into another world entirely. She began dating Preston Hale, the son of a wealthy family in Vale, and my parents treated the relationship as though she'd won the lottery. Every conversation turned into updates about Preston's family, their money, their reputation, their home near the ski resorts. Mom would say, "If this works out, our lives could change forever." And I would wonder when her idea of "our" had ever included me. One morning, Leanna emailed me a digital wedding invitation. It wasn't sent to a group or the family, it was sent just to me with a single line underneath. "Try to dress classy. Don't embarrass me." I stared at it longer than I should have, torn between hurt and resignation. Later that day, Mom called and reminded me that this is the biggest day for our family. She said it so casually I almost laughed. I'd had milestones: graduation, a scholarship, a new home, a career, but none of them had ever been big days to her. Still I went, because despite everything, I wanted peace. The wedding was held at a luxury lodge in Vale, the kind of place where every tablecloth looked hand-ironed and the air smelled like pine and expensive cologne. From the moment I stepped inside, I knew I didn't fit. Leanna glowed under the chandeliers, surrounded by people who adored her because they adored her husband's last name. My parents floated behind her like satellites, introducing themselves as if they were royalty. I stood beside them at one point, unnoticed, like decor someone forgot to remove. Then Preston approached me. He smiled, but it wasn't kind. "You're the systems engineer, right?" he said, lowering his voice. "Good. Every family needs someone who knows how to fix things." The implication hit immediately. I wasn't a guest. I wasn't a brother. I was a tool. I walked away before my anger slipped through the cracks and ruined Leanna's moment. Near the end of the night, I overheard Mom bragging to a group of guests, saying Leanna is truly our gem. Calum. Well, he's always been independent. Never needed much. Hearing that spoken so freely made me realize I'd never been part of their dreams or hopes, not even now when they stood at what they saw as the height of their lives. I stepped outside into the freezing Vale air, letting the cold ground me. As I walked to my car, I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I'd memorized years ago, an old dealer who specialized in classic cars. When he picked up and told me a 2002 Corvette Z06 had just become available, something ignited in me. I told him I'd take it. It wasn't just a purchase. It was a declaration. A promise to myself that from this point forward I would stop standing in the shadow of a family that had never looked for me in the light. Restoring the Corvette became the part of my day I looked forward to the most. After long hours in Denver, I would drive back to Boulder, roll up the garage door, and lose myself in the details, polishing the frame, rewiring the dash, tuning every inch with the kind of patience I'd never been allowed to show at home. While I was rebuilding that car, Leanna was doing the opposite. She was living fast and loud in Vale, spending Preston's money like it was endless, showing off designer bags online, and posting quotes about living your truth, even though her truth was held together by other people's wallets. Every call from my mother was an update about them, what they bought, where they traveled, what restaurant they had dinner at, which wealthy friend they had met. I realized that even though I had cut my own path, my family still expected me to stay in the shadows, ready to step in whenever Leanna fell apart. One night close to midnight, my phone rang. It was my mother, her voice cracked with panic. She told me Preston wanted a divorce. Leanna had maxed out cards, embarrassed the Hale family at events, and ignored every warning he gave. My mother demanded that I drive home immediately to support her. I didn't want to go, but something in me still felt obligated, so I made the long drive back to Flagstone Ridge. The moment I stepped inside the house was chaos. Leanna was throwing picture frames, screaming Preston's name through tears, cursing him for everything she had caused. My parents hovered around her pleading, promising they would replace anything she lost. They treated her heartbreak like a natural disaster I was expected to help clean up. I stood in the doorway holding my coat, feeling like a stranger in the home where I'd grown up. When she finally ran out of breath, I gently suggested that maybe finding a job could help her regain control of her life. The room froze. Leanna whipped a pillow at me and yelled that I was insulting her, that I had always been jealous of her life. I stood there stunned, not because of the words, but because of how quickly my mother turned on me. She jabbed a finger toward my face and said I had no empathy, that I didn't understand real pain because I'd never struggled the way Leanna did. I almost laughed at the absurdity, but before I could respond, my father chimed in, saying that if I wasn't going to help, I should leave. He said it calmly, like he was asking me to take out the trash. I tried to explain myself, to tell them I wanted Leanna to find direction, but my mother cut me off and ordered me out of the house. Leanna screamed after me that I wasn't welcome back unless I chose her side. That was the moment something in me shut down. I walked out without looking back, the cold night swallowing whatever ties remained. As I drove my Corvette away from town, my phone buzzed with an email from work. It said I'd been selected for a 10-week assignment in Seattle, a project people fought hard to get. I stared at the screen, realizing the timing wasn't just convenient, it was a lifeline. For once, the universe seemed to point me somewhere other than the Price family orbit. I accepted the assignment immediately. I told myself I would leave Colorado behind for a while and give myself the space I should have taken years ago. As the highway opened in front of me, I decided I was done trying to fix a family that refused to see me. For the first time in my life, I chose myself. 10 weeks in Seattle passed faster than I expected. Working on the project gave me a kind of clarity I didn't know I needed. No one there knew my family, no one compared me to anyone else, and no one demanded I play the role of the responsible son who holds everyone together. When I returned to Boulder, I felt calm, ready to settle back into a quiet routine. I assumed the storm back in Flagstone Ridge had burned out by now. I was wrong. The first sign something was off came as soon as I opened my condo door. The scent of Leanna's perfume hit me before I even stepped inside. Music was playing in the living room, and there she was, lying across my sofa, legs kicked up on my coffee table, surrounded by shopping bags, takeout containers, and half-open suitcases. She looked up lazily and said, "My parents told her she could stay here to clear her mind." She acted like I was the intruder. She went on and on about what she called her healing shopping spree, bragging about her new clothes and how retail therapy was more effective than any advice I had ever given. She never once mentioned the divorce. And then she told me she needed to stay for a few more weeks to balance her energy. I barely heard her because I couldn't stop staring at the tray near the door where I always kept my keys. My Corvette key wasn't there. I excused myself, heart pounding, and went straight to the parking garage. The spot was empty. I walked the entire level, checked security feeds, spoke to the night guard. The footage showed my Corvette driving out 3 weeks earlier, and the person behind the wheel was unmistakable. My stomach twisted. Only someone with access to the spare key at my parents' house could have taken it. I called my mother. She answered with the brightest voice I'd heard in months, telling me Leanna was finally relaxing in London. When I asked where my car was, she laughed, actually laughed, and said, "Thanks to that car, our daughter is enjoying her trip. You should be happy she's doing better." I needed a moment just to breathe. Not even in my worst assumptions had I imagined they would cross this line. Then something inside me cracked in a way that felt final. I let out a small laugh, not because it was funny, but because the betrayal was so complete, it almost felt unreal. My mother immediately snapped, asking why I was laughing. That's when I told her the truth. The Corvette wasn't registered under my name. It belonged to the company as part of a corporate program, meaning selling. It wasn't just wrong, it was illegal. I heard her breath hitch. My father tried to say something, but his voice trembled. Behind them, Leanna shouted, asking what I'd done. I ended the call calmly and walked away from the garage, feeling the kind of resolve I had never known. My family had taken everything they could from me my entire life: attention, recognition, peace, now even the one thing I had built with my own hands. But this time, they were the ones who had crossed into territory they couldn't escape. I wasn't afraid anymore because I realized something simple and powerful: they had nothing left that I was afraid to lose. And I had everything ahead of me that they could never take again. When I hung up the phone, the silence in my condo felt hollow, almost unreal. I stood there, keys still in my hand, mind split between shock and a kind of cold clarity I'd never felt before. The line had been crossed. There was no walking it back. As I stepped inside, Leanna shot upright from the sofa, eyes wide and panicked. "What did you just do?" she demanded, her voice shaking. She wasn't worried about the legal weight of what I'd said. She was worried about her London trip, about the luxury she'd chased using something she didn't own. I ignored her question and went straight to my office, pulling out documents, purchase papers, emails, the corporate ownership agreement, every piece of proof the company would need. For years, I'd let things slide, hoping the next time would be different. But this wasn't something I could swallow anymore. When I came back out, Leanna was pacing. I told her plainly she needed to pack her things and leave my home. She stared at me like I'd slapped her. Mom and Dad said I could stay here. She argued like their permission had any legal standing in my life. I lifted the condo deed in front of her and read my name slowly, clearly. She froze, but only for a moment, before snapping back that I owed her support because she was in a fragile place and I was her brother. For the first time in my life, I said the truth out loud. I didn't owe her anything, not her recovery, not her lifestyle, not the consequences of her choices. She had mistaken my silence for responsibility. But silence doesn't equal devotion. That's when my mother started calling. The first call I ignored. The fifth rang over the sound of Leanna's angry breathing. I finally answered, and Mom launched into accusations so fast she barely paused to breathe, calling me selfish, cruel, ungrateful, someone who only cared about material things. My father's voice appeared in the background, trembling, as he insisted they didn't know the car belonged to the company. I let them finish before I said the only thing that mattered, not knowing the law doesn't excuse breaking it. The line went quiet. My father, a man who never hesitated to lecture, had nothing to say. For once, they understood the weight of what they'd done. An hour later, I got a call from my company's legal department. They had already been notified about the missing vehicle through the automated report system, and now that I'd confirmed it had been sold without authorization, they needed every detail. They asked for the garage footage, the documentation, timestamps, the full story. I sent everything. As I clicked upload, a strange calm washed over me. This was no longer a family argument. This was a corporate asset taken and sold illegally. And the people responsible were the two people who raised me. Later that evening, I met with a company attorney who laid out the options. Because the sale violated state and corporate property laws, the company had the right to pursue direct legal action, but only if I authorized them to do so. My hand tightened around the pen. Some part of me, a small aching part, still wanted to pull away, to keep pretending that if I tried hard enough, this family could function. But another part, the part that had been ignored, dismissed, used, knew exactly what had to be done. I signed the authorization. It felt like closing a door I had left cracked open my entire life. When the attorney left, I stepped out onto my balcony. Boulder's lights glowed beneath me, buildings humming with life, completely indifferent to what was happening inside my chest. For the first time, I allowed myself to see the truth. Family is not sacred when it demands your silence as payment. Home isn't a place that hurts you. I realized I had no reason to keep clinging to something that had never been mine. I stood there, breathing in the cool night air, knowing that the next step would change everything, but also knowing I wasn't afraid anymore. Whatever came next, I was finally ready for it. The courtroom in Denver felt colder than any place I'd ever been, not because of the air conditioning, but because of the distance in my parents' eyes when I walked in. They sat on the opposite side, stiff, pale, refusing to meet my gaze. Leanna sat behind them, wearing oversized sunglasses, as if hiding from the glare of consequences she helped create. I sat with the company lawyer, my hands steady on the table, my breathing even. I wasn't here as their son. I was here as the representative of the party they had harmed. When the judge entered and the proceedings began, my lawyer presented the first piece of evidence, garage footage, clearly showing Leanna taking the Corvette out 3 weeks earlier. Not me. Not an employee. Leanna. Then came the paperwork, the transfer documents containing a forged version of my signature. The room went silent as the handwriting expert finished explaining the discrepancies. My parents tried to argue that the car was a family asset, something earned together. My lawyer didn't raise his voice. He simply asked, "If that's true, does that mean they were also free to sell Mr. Price's personal condo without his consent?" The question hung in the courtroom like a stone dropped into water. No one had an answer. The judge delivered the ruling without hesitation. My parents were ordered to repay the full value of the car plus damages and legal fees. The amount was far more than they could afford, and I knew the house in Flagstone Ridge, the place where every memory of my childhood lived, would have to be sold. My mother broke down sobbing. My father lowered his head like he was carrying a weight he couldn't hold anymore. Leanna gripped his sleeve, whispering that I had destroyed the family. I heard her, but I didn't respond. I didn't owe anyone in that row an explanation anymore. After the ruling, I walked out of the courthouse without looking back. I blocked their numbers that same afternoon, not out of spite, but out of survival. A week later, I packed my things and moved to Seattle, permanently choosing the place where for the first time in my life I had felt the possibility of peace. Work moved quickly, and soon I was promoted into a technical management role. I bought myself a new car, nothing extravagant, but honest, earned, and mine. When I drove it through the city's narrow streets, I felt a freedom that didn't need validation or approval. I began rebuilding my life piece by piece. New friendships, new routines, new boundaries. It was strange at first, living without the weight of expectation or obligation, but slowly the silence that once felt empty became something comforting, something steady. I started to understand that love only means something when it isn't used as a weapon. In the end, I didn't hate my family. I simply chose to stop letting them rewrite my sense of self. Standing on my balcony one evening overlooking Seattle's skyline, I realized something simple but profound. Losing my dream car wasn't the tragedy I once thought it was. Because in the wreckage of everything they took, I found the one thing I'd never had before: myself. And for the first time, I stepped into a life that actually belonged to me. When I look back at everything that happened, the stolen car, the shouting, the courtroom, the final moment when I walked out and chose myself, it no longer feels like a story about betrayal. It feels like a story about a man learning to finally open the door and walk out of a burning house he'd mistaken for a home. And maybe that's the strangest part of healing, realizing the pain you carried wasn't caused by some sudden disaster, but by the slow, steady erosion of your worth over years, even decades. I grew up believing love meant tolerating everything bending until I couldn't bend anymore, and being grateful for whatever scraps of attention I got along the way. I thought I was the problem. Too quiet, too independent, too easy to overlook. But when the dust settled, I finally understood something I wish I had realized sooner. Some families don't break you all at once, they break you in small, quiet ways, until you no longer recognize the person you became trying to earn a place that was never really offered to you. There were nights, even after the court ruling, even after cutting ties, when I lay awake wondering if I had gone too far. If I should have forgiven them one more time, or been softer, or handled things like a good son. I replayed memories, examined every word, every silence, every moment I had allowed myself to get smaller so they could feel bigger. But the truth is, love that demands you shrink is not love at all. Love that asks you to carry the weight of everyone else's mistakes until your knees buckle is not love. And the hardest lesson of adulthood, the one no one prepares you for, is that sometimes the people who raised you are the same people you must walk away from to save yourself. Seattle gave me something Flagstone Ridge never could: space. Space to think. Space to breathe. Space to let my mind stop replaying old conversations like broken tapes. And in that space, I started to understand what boundaries really mean. They're not walls built out of anger. They're doors you can lock so you don't continue letting storms destroy you from the inside. I stopped apologizing for wanting peace. I stopped justifying why I deserved respect. I stopped rationing my own happiness because someone else had decided I didn't need much. Instead, I learned to ask myself questions I had never dared to ask. What do you want? What do you enjoy? Who are you when no one is taking from you? I rebuilt myself the same way I once rebuilt that Corvette, slowly, carefully, piece by piece. But unlike the car, I wasn't restoring an old version. I was building someone new. Someone who doesn't apologize for existing. Someone who doesn't beg for space at a table he helped build. Someone who finally understands that the family you create can be more healing than the family you were born into. And the strangest part, life got warmer. Simpler. Quieter, yes. but in the best possible way. I learned how to enjoy the silence because it no longer felt like punishment. I learned how to trust people who saw me, really saw me. And I learned that choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's survival, especially when the people who should have protected you were the very ones who taught you to disappear. To anyone listening, maybe from a small apartment late at night, or from a bus ride home, or during a quiet moment you're not sure how to fill, I want you to hear this. You are not wrong for wanting respect. You are not demanding too much for wanting love that doesn't hurt. And you are not ungrateful for finally deciding you've had enough. Walking away doesn't mean you stopped caring. It means you started caring about yourself. It means you learned that peace is worth protecting even if you have to protect it alone. And above all, it means you're human, someone who deserves more than being the last priority in your own life. My story isn't perfect. It's messy and painful in places I still haven't touched yet. But it's real. And maybe in some strange way it's a reminder that we all have a breaking point, and beyond it, a beginning. If you're somewhere on that edge, feeling guilty for wanting better, feeling afraid to take that step, feeling like no one will understand, I want you to know that you're not alone. Truly. Not anymore. And before you go, if any part of this story touched something in you, if it made you think of your own family, your own battles, your own quiet strength, I'd love for you to say something in the comments. Even just a hear or listening or letting me know where you're watching from. It means more than you know. Sometimes the smallest connection can make someone feel seen in a world that often makes us feel invisible. And if you want to stay with me for more stories like this, raw, honest, sometimes painful but always real, please consider subscribing. Every person who joins makes this space feel a little less lonely, a little more human, a little more like the kind of family we choose for ourselves. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And wherever you are tonight, I hope you choose yourself too. And if you're still here, still listening to me unravel everything I once held tight, thank you. Truly. There's a kind of courage in staying until the last word, a quiet bravery in choosing to witness someone else's truth while wrestling with your own. Maybe you've lived a version of this story. Maybe you're standing at that invisible crossroads where loyalty and self-preservation pull in opposite directions. Or maybe you're just trying to make sense of the people who shaped you, the ones who loved you in ways that hurt or hurt you in ways they called love. Whatever brought you here, I want you to remember something I wish someone had told me years ago. You don't have to earn the right to be treated with kindness. You don't have to deserve respect. You don't have to prove your worth to people who refuse to see it. You're allowed to walk away. You're allowed to choose a quieter life, a safer life, a life where your heartbeat isn't something you have to hide or justify. And someday, maybe sooner than you think, you'll look back at the ruins of what you left behind and realize it wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of you reclaiming your own story. If mine gave you even a moment of clarity or comfort, I'd be grateful if you stayed, commented, or subscribed. Not for numbers, not for noise, just to remind both of us that stories like ours don't have to be carried alone.